When Julian Blake, a seasoned television host known for his sharp wit and sometimes dismissive tone, welcomed entrepreneur Malik Carter onto his primetime talk show, no one anticipated the firestorm that would follow. Malik Carter wasn't new to the spotlight. At 34, he was the founder of Rise and Build, a tech company focused on empowering underserved communities through digital education and small business tools. His story, growing up in a single-parent household, teaching himself to code and eventually building a multi-million-dollar company, had made him a favorite among young entrepreneurs. But as the segment began, it became clear that Julian wasn't interested in a celebration. "So, Malik," Julian said, leaning forward with a smirk, "some say your success is just another media hype. That your background is used more as a marketing strategy than a real foundation for your achievements. Care to respond?" The air in the studio thickened. Viewers watching at home could feel the tension crackle through the screen. Malik didn't flinch. He smiled calmly. "I'm glad you asked that, Julian," he said. "Because for far too long, people have believed success has to look a certain way, come from certain schools, speak a certain language. But I didn't come here to fit that mold. I came to break it." The audience applauded, but Julian pressed further. "Come on," he said. "You're telling me you built a company with zero outside help? No connections, no shortcuts? That's hard to believe." Malik nodded slowly. "I had help, but not the kind you're thinking. I had help from a neighborhood library. From mentors who volunteered their time. From a mother who worked night shifts so I could have internet at home. Maybe not the kind of connections you're used to, but they were more than enough." By now, the applause was louder, and Julian's smirk had faded into something less confident. The interview continued for another 10 minutes, but the tone had shifted. Julian asked his remaining questions with less swagger, and Malik responded with the same calm, assertive clarity that had already won over the audience. By the next morning, a 2-minute clip from the interview was everywhere. Young CEO educates veteran host on what real support looks like. The moment the room shifted. He didn't raise his voice, but he shut it down. Social media exploded. On platforms like X and TikTok, users replayed Malik's line, "Maybe not the kind of connections you're used to, but they were more than enough," like a rallying cry. Julian Blake's inbox, meanwhile, was flooded. Viewers accused him of underestimating Malik, of steering the interview with thinly veiled bias. Sponsors began asking questions. Producers scheduled emergency meetings. Julian, used to being untouchable, suddenly found himself on uncertain ground. For Malik, though, things were just getting started. He released a video that afternoon, not to celebrate but to clarify. "I didn't go on that show to call anyone out," he said, sitting at his desk, wearing a simple black hoodie with Rise and Build printed across the chest. "I went to share a message that matters, that talent and determination aren't defined by zip code or resume. And if anyone needed to hear that today, I hope it helped." That video went just as viral. What started as a viral clip quickly evolved into a national conversation. Morning shows debated it. Podcasts dissected it. University professors referenced it in lectures about communication, leadership, and overcoming perception. But the most surprising reaction came from young professionals across the country, especially those who saw themselves in Malik. A movement began to form under the hashtag more than enough. People shared their own stories of being overlooked, underestimated, or boxed in by assumptions. Students, small business owners, creatives, and coders posted videos in response to Malik's message. "I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I'm self-taught. I've been told I'm not what success looks like. But here I am, building anyway. At Just Creates, digital artist. I grew up fixing phones in my uncle's garage. Today I run a repair network across 3 states. Hashtag more than enough. At Fix It Theo." Malik's message had tapped into something deeper than a media moment. It wasn't just about one interview, it was about rewriting the rules of success. Meanwhile, Julian Blake faced a harsh reckoning. Viewers began turning off his show. A network exec hinted, off the record, that producers were considering a format shakeup. The public had spoken, and they weren't interested in outdated narratives. But Julian wasn't ready to disappear quietly. 2 weeks later, Julian Blake reappeared, not on his usual set, but in a live-streamed video from what looked like a home office. Gone were the bright lights and curated charm. He looked tired but focused. "I've had a lot of time to think," he began. "I've hosted this show for 19 years. And somewhere along the way I stopped listening. I judged too quickly. I interrupted. I assumed. And a few weeks ago someone called me out, not by yelling or pointing fingers but just by showing up with truth and poise. Malik Carter didn't embarrass me. I did that all by myself. The video stunned the public. Not just for the humility in Julian's tone, but because it felt real. Unscripted. Personal. Then came the twist. Julian announced he was stepping away from his show, not in disgrace but to create something new. I want to use whatever's left of my platform to spotlight voices that challenge me. People building the future, not just talking about the past. And if Malik Carter's open to it, I'd like him to be my first guest. The internet froze. What had started as a tense TV moment had now turned into a potential full-circle story. The ball was in Malik's court. For 3 days Malik Carter said nothing. No tweet. No comment. No video. Speculation swirled. Some said he was ignoring the invite, others guessed he was planning something big. But those who knew Malik understood his silence wasn't avoidance. It was calculation. He believed in showing up at the right time in the right way. On the 4th day he posted a single sentence on his profile. Let's build something better. Together. Attached was a promo image for a new live conversation series. Beyond the Spotlight, hosted by Julian Blake. First guest, Malik Carter. It would be aired across multiple platforms, unfiltered and uncut. The nation tuned in. The episode began with no theme music, no flashy graphics. Just Julian and Malik sitting across from each other in a quiet, minimalist space. 2 chairs. 2 microphones. Nothing to distract from the conversation. Julian opened first. I've interviewed celebrities, politicians, athletes. But I don't think I've ever walked into a conversation more nervous than this one. Malik gave a small smile. That's because this time it's not about being in control. It's about being open. What followed was one of the most honest, layered conversations broadcast in years. They talked about blind spots, not just in media but in leadership, in business, in systems that quietly favor some voices over others. Malik didn't accuse and Julian didn't defend. They listened. They questioned. They explored how different life looks depending on where you start, and how much harder you have to push when people don't expect you to succeed. Malik explained what it meant to build a company from scratch while constantly being told to tone it down, or fit the mold. Julian shared how years in the industry shaped his perspective, and how easily that perspective became a filter he didn't even realize he was applying. There were no grand apologies, no viral zingers. Just truth, humility, and mutual growth. But then came the moment that sealed it all. Julian leaned forward. People keep saying I got shut down. But that's not how I see it anymore. I think what really happened is I got opened up. The silence afterward wasn't awkward, it was respectful. The kind of pause that says, that mattered. The fallout was massive. Clips from the episode were shared by educators, business leaders, and media personalities. News anchors called it one of the most important cultural conversations of the year. University panels held discussions on it. Podcasts ran breakdowns. But Malik had already moved forward. Within a week, Rise and Build announced a partnership with several national networks to launch a mentorship and digital access initiative in undersupported communities. Julian used his remaining network contacts to help secure airtime and sponsorship, not as a gesture but as an investment. The partnership wasn't symbolic. It was tangible. It funded computer labs, startup training boot camps, and scholarship grants for emerging creators and engineers. People didn't just talk about change anymore, they saw it happening in real time. Months later, a student in Detroit stood up during a Q&A session at a community event featuring Malik. What gave you the confidence to speak your truth on national TV like that? Malik paused. I didn't go on that show to be seen. I went on to make sure others were heard. If we wait for the perfect moment to speak up, we'll never say anything at all. Sometimes, the most powerful change starts with one calm voice in a loud room. The crowd rose to their feet. Malik Carter hadn't just shut someone down. He opened a door. And then held it open for everyone else. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable conversation between Julian Blake and Malik Carter. The media moment had faded, but the movement it sparked had only grown stronger. Across the country, the phrase "more than enough" had become more than just a hashtag. It was now the name of a non-profit incubator created by Malik's company, Rise and Build, designed to give real-world support to overlooked entrepreneurs, creatives, and students. The pilot program launched in 5 cities, Detroit, Atlanta, Oakland, Newark, and Birmingham, each location selected not for its headlines, but for its hidden brilliance. These were places rich with talent but starved of opportunity. And that was the point. Each More Than Enough campus offered co-working spaces, mentorship clinics, free coding and design boot camps, and microgrants for community-led projects. Within months, over 2,000 applications had poured in. Malik didn't just show up to the ribbon cuttings, he mentored. He taught. He listened. He took late-night calls from young founders trying to figure out how to survive their first month in business. He reminded them over and over again that their ideas weren't too small, too ambitious, or too different. The world doesn't need more copies, he said in one session. It needs people bold enough to be original, even when the room looks nothing like them. Meanwhile, Julian Blake was writing again. No cameras. No crew. Just a blog he updated weekly called Unlearning in Public. It wasn't flashy. Sometimes his writing rambled. Sometimes he got things wrong. But it was real. He shared stories of conversations he was having with voices he'd previously overlooked. Educators, community organizers, founders of micro-businesses. He started hosting quiet gatherings in cities he used to fly over, sitting in libraries and cafes, listening more than he spoke. I used to think power came from talking first, he wrote in one post. I've learned it often comes from being the last to speak, after everyone else has been heard. The industry had long since moved on from Julian's show. New voices were rising in media, more diverse, more grounded, less polished but far more relevant. And Julian, surprisingly, didn't seem to mind. He wasn't chasing ratings anymore. He was rebuilding something slower, credibility and clarity. By the end of the year, Malik was invited to deliver the keynote at a global innovation summit. The room was packed with CEOs, investors, and international leaders. But he opened the same way he always did. I wasn't supposed to be here, he said. Statistically speaking, I should have been another name on a list no one reads. But here's what stats can't measure: belief. Belief in your voice. Belief in your value. Belief that even if you don't start with much, you can still start. He paused, then added, and to those who were told they had to be quiet to succeed, I hope I'm proof that you don't. His speech received a standing ovation, not for its polish but for its power. He didn't just tell a story, he represented one. A bigger one. On the anniversary of the original interview, a documentary aired. When the mic was turned, a feature about how one moment sparked a nationwide dialogue. The final scene showed footage of Malik walking through a more than enough campus, students gathered around laptops, whiteboards full of ideas, voices full of urgency. Julian narrated the closing words. Sometimes the moment we fear will define our failure ends up reshaping our purpose. Sometimes being challenged doesn't destroy us, it reveals what we've yet to become. And sometimes being quiet isn't weakness. It's wisdom making space for something greater. Fade to black. What had begun as a tense confrontation on a talk show stage had evolved into something much deeper. A catalyst for rethinking power, voice, and value. Malik Carter hadn't just defended his space. He expanded it, for thousands more to step into. And Julian Blake, once the gatekeeper, became something far more rare in modern media. A man willing to change. This wasn't just a comeback story. It was a story about what happens when truth, vision, and humility collide, and everyone decides to rise. Together. 2 years had passed since the interview that first shook the media world. By now, Rise and Build had expanded to 18 cities across North America, with satellite partnerships in Kenya, Brazil, and the Philippines. The idea was simple: create access, foster talent, remove unnecessary gatekeeping. But what made it revolutionary was how deeply community voices were woven into every decision. Malik Carter wasn't trying to be a savior. He was building ecosystems, then getting out of the way to let them flourish. Each campus of More Than Enough operated with local leadership, local mentors, local solutions. It wasn't one model imposed across cultures. It was a living network of ideas, each one fueled by the same principle. If you've lived through the problem, you deserve a seat at the table where solutions are designed. And the results were staggering. A group of teenage coders from the Oakland campus developed a public safety app that helped first responders communicate with nonverbal citizens. A single mother in Houston launched a food delivery service that employed women transitioning out of the shelter system. A former delivery driver in Nairobi scaled a micrologistics platform that was now being piloted by an international NGO. These weren't flashy headlines, they were lives changed. Julian Blake rarely appeared in public now. Not because he was hiding, but because he'd redefined his role. He became a silent advisor on Beyond the Spotlight, the interview series he once hosted. Now it was run by a rotating panel of young journalists, many of whom had emerged from the Rise and Build Media Accelerator. Julian worked behind the scenes, editing scripts, offering guidance, connecting old industry names with new creators who were rewriting the future. He no longer saw himself as the face of anything. He saw himself as a bridge. One evening he received an unexpected letter. Mr. Blake. I used to watch your show with my grandfather. I remember thinking, I'll never be invited to sit across from someone like him. But now I've been offered a full-time spot on your new platform. Thank you for leaving the seat open. Sincerely, Jamari, age 23, future host of Beyond the Spotlight. Julian read the letter twice, folded it gently, and placed it in a box marked Keep Going. Though Malik had turned down dozens of major interview requests, one day he surprised everyone by appearing on a newly launched international broadcast, Ground Level, a global show spotlighting changemakers whose stories often went untold. His episode wasn't filmed in a studio. It took place inside the original public library where he had taught himself to code on outdated computers as a teenager. As he walked through the rows of books, he paused at a cracked desk in the corner. "This was my first launch pad," he said. "And no one noticed. And that's okay. Because the truth is, if you wait for the world to validate your worth, you might never start." So I stopped waiting. The camera followed him as he sat across from the show's host, a young Nigerian journalist named Temi, who had herself been inspired by the More Than Enough movement. Temi smiled. "You're often credited with starting a wave. But I want to ask, who were your waves?" Malik didn't hesitate. "My mother. My fifth-grade teacher who said, 'Don't shrink to survive.' My friend Dante who was killed the year I launched my company. He used to say, 'Build like it matters, even if they don't see it yet.' And Julian Blake." The room went still. Temi leaned forward. "Julian?" Malik nodded. "Because it takes courage to change in front of people." And he did. Despite the scale of his reach, Malik refused to lose the personal touch. Every month, he carved out time to visit one More Than Enough location and mentor 10 new creators directly. No cameras. No press. He reminded each one of the same thing. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful. You just have to be real and relentless. He spoke in classrooms, prison education programs, and remote villages with no Wi-Fi. He launched a global fellowship that placed local leaders, not foreign consultants, at the center of development projects. And still, every year on the anniversary of that fateful interview, he sent one private message to Julian. Still listening. Still building. The final chapter of this stage began not with Malik or Julian, but with a teenage girl named Isla. She had grown up in a foster system marked by instability and silence. But at 16, she walked into a More Than Enough center in Kansas City and asked for help starting a digital magazine to amplify youth voices from the margins. She called it Louder. Within a year, it had 100,000 readers and contributors from 4 countries. Isla was invited to speak at an international summit, where she opened with the line, "I'm not here because someone gave me a microphone. I'm here because someone reminded me I had a voice all along." Malik watched her from the front row. Julian watched from the back. And for the first time both of them knew. They weren't the story anymore. They were the soil. 10 years had passed since the interview that sparked it all. Malik Carter stood alone in the middle of a construction site, not of a corporate office or innovation hub, but a school. Not just any school. The Carter Institute for Creative Engineering and Public Imagination. It was being built in his hometown, just blocks from where he grew up. The school was unlike any traditional campus. Solar-powered, community-run, and curriculum designed in partnership with students, artists, and engineers from around the world. When asked why he chose to build a school, Malik gave the simplest answer. Because the future starts younger than we think. On the day of the Institute's groundbreaking, Malik received a handwritten envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, elegant and aged. "Malik, 10 years ago you changed the trajectory of my life, by challenging it. I've stepped fully away from public media now. I write letters. I plant trees. I listen. This is my final message to you, not as a broadcast but as a thank you. I was trained to lead with questions that made others shrink. You taught me to ask the ones that help people grow. I hope the world follows your rhythm. I already have. Julian." No fanfare. No post about it. Just gratitude. The Carter Institute opened with 200 students from 15 neighborhoods. The first class included a 13-year-old inventor who built a battery from kitchen scraps. A young poet who created an AI that writes healing messages in endangered languages. A blind programmer who designed an audio-based 3D interface to navigate digital space. They didn't see Malik as a celebrity. To them he was a guide, a builder. A man who listened. And Malik? He didn't walk around with security or press. He sat on the floor with the students. He reviewed their pitches. He reminded them. Build like someone else will stand on what you make. Because they will. Years later, Malik agreed to one final filmed conversation. Not for a network. Not for a book. For the school's time capsule. The student interviewer, 14-year-old Lena, was nervous. She fumbled the first question. "Mr. Carter, what do you want to be remembered for?" Malik smiled softly. "You know, when I was younger, I thought legacy meant buildings, headlines, tech. But now, I think the best legacy is what you make possible for people you'll never meet." He paused. "I want to be remembered not for what I built, but for who built after me." Lena blinked. "That's it." Malik grinned. "That's everything." In the closing shot of the time capsule recording, Malik walks out of the school courtyard and watches students planting trees along the sidewalk. Trees that won't provide full shade for another 20 years. Still, the kids are laughing. They know exactly what they're doing. As Malik steps into the sunlight, a familiar voice echoes from the recording room, long after the camera cuts. He didn't raise his voice. He raised a generation. Fade to black.